All right, folks. Does mead have to be sweet? One of the biggest misconceptions about mead is that it's always a rich, syrupy, honey sweet drink. In reality, there's a scale of sweetness, and interestingly, most historical meads were likely much drier than many modern commercial examples. And here's why. Wild yeast and brewing yeast consume sugars wherever they can. So, if a medieval mead maker mixed honey and water and allowed fermentation to proceed naturally, the yeast would often ferment until either the sugars were largely depleted, which would produce a relatively dry mead, or the alcohol level became high enough to inhibit further fermentation. Without modern stabilization methods like potassium metabisulfite and potassium sorbate, or sterile filtration or refrigeration, deliberately preserving residual sweetness was difficult and super unreliable. Also, for much of history, honey was expensive and very labor intensive to produce and collect. So, leaving large amounts of unfermented honey in a beverage would have been an expensive waste and indulgent luxury. Many historical recipes reflect this reality. They often use honey at rates that would produce moderate strength meads, not the massive honey loads in common modern sack meads. And so the idea of mead as liquid honey is largely a modern expectation rather than a universal historical reality. So, what did historical mead taste like? Probably everyday type of mead was a lot less sweet than many modern commercial meads, more akin to a dry white wine or cider, sometimes tart, earthy, smoky, herbal, acidic, really depending on the type of ingredients and fermentation practices. And here's the big thing. They were variable from batch to batch. No two were likely ever the same. That said, sweet meads certainly existed. Throughout history, we do very much see prestigious or ceremonial meads that could have been very sweet, especially among wealthier households and tribes. So, why is modern mead so oftentimes sweeter? Well, modern mead makers have much easier access to honey and also to tools that historical brewers would have lacked, such as reliable yeast strains, hydrometers and refractometers, chemical stabilization, temperature control, and backsweetening techniques. This allows producers to intentionally create meads with significant residual sugar while maintaining balance and shelf stability. There's also a market preference factor. Many consumers associate honey with sweetness, so commercial meaderies often produce semi-sweet to sweet meads because they are more approachable to new drinkers and seem to fulfill an assumption and associated expectation. Interestingly, many modern homebrewers have pushed back against this trend. As knowledge of fermentation science has become more widely available, home mead makers have increasingly embraced dry and semi-dry meads, exploring styles that are often closer to historical examples and showcasing honey's character without relying on heavy residual sweetness. And so it all comes down to this. While sweet dessert style meads still dominate parts of today's commercial market and competition circuits, mead can truly be whatever you want it to be. The question really isn't about how sweet a mead should be, but rather what style you're trying to create and the experiences you want to cultivate for those who consume it. May mead be on your table.